The massive Galactic Council mothership floated in space like a crystal palace. Its walls gleamed with perfect silver metal, and blue lights pulsed along its sides. Inside the main meeting hall, alien diplomats from dozens of worlds sat in floating chairs arranged in a perfect circle. Ambassador Zexithul of the Valerian hegemony stood at the center. His tall, thin body swayed gracefully as he spoke. His forearms gestured with elegant movements that had been perfected over thousands of years of diplomatic training. Today, we welcome humanity to our war effort against the Void Swarm, Zexithul announced. His voice carried easily through the hall's perfect acoustics. Each member species has contributed their finest warships to defend our galaxy. Let us now see what Earth has brought to this noble cause. The giant viewing screen at the front of the hall flickered to life. Every alien in the room leaned forward to see humanity's contribution to their advanced fleet. What appeared on the screen made several diplomats gasp in horror. The human warship looked like someone had taken a cargo hauler, crashed it into a junkyard, and then tried to fix it with whatever they could find. Thick metal plates were welded over obvious holes in the hull. Bright orange foam oozed from gaps between the patches. One of the engine exhausts was pointing in the wrong direction, and the other appeared to be held on with what looked suspiciously like industrial tape. The ship's name was painted on the side in messy white letters, UES Buckshot. There must be some mistake, whispered Consul Varix of the Crystalline Collective. Her crystal body chimed softly with distress. Surely this is a construction vessel, not a warship. The airlock hissed open, and 3 humans walked into the meeting hall. They wore simple blue uniforms that looked comfortable rather than ceremonial. The woman in front had short brown hair and a friendly smile that seemed completely out of place in the formal diplomatic setting. "Hi, everyone," she said, waving at the assembled aliens. "I'm Captain Maria Santos of the UES Buckshot. Thanks for having us." Zexithul's diplomatic training kicked in, though his voice carried a note of confusion. "Captain Santos, we are honored by your presence. Perhaps you could tell us about your vessel's capabilities?" Captain Santos's smile grew wider. "Oh, she's a real beauty. Want me to give you the tour?" Before anyone could object, Santos activated a small device, and a holographic display of her ship appeared in the center of the room. The 3-dimensional image only made the vessel look worse. "This here's our main engine," Santos said, pointing to a section that looked like it had been rebuilt at least 3 times. "It's a hybrid fusion chemical setup, pretty reliable except it only explodes every other Tuesday." The Valerian ambassador's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "Explodes?" "Well, more like a controlled detonation," Santos explained cheerfully. "We've got it down to a science. Tommy here." She gestured to a shorter man with grease stains on his uniform. "He's our chief engineer. He can predict exactly when it's going to blow and reroute power just in time." Tommy Rodriguez nodded proudly. "Haven't lost an engine in almost 6 months," he said. "Course, we've only had this one for 4 months, but still." Several aliens exchanged worried glances. Santos continued her presentation with obvious enthusiasm. "The hull's been reinforced with emergency foam in 17 different places. Each patch is stronger than the original metal, so we're actually more protected now than when we started." "What about weapons?" asked General Thrax of the warrior clans. His reptilian features showed deep skepticism. "Now you're talking," Santos's eyes lit up. "Our main gun is this beauty right here." The hologram highlighted what appeared to be mining equipment bolted to the front of the ship. "It's a railgun we jury-rigged from an asteroid borer. Fires solid metal slugs at about 15% of light speed." "A kinetic weapon?" Thrax sounded insulted. "We abandoned such primitive technology millennia ago." "Works great, though," said the 3rd human, a woman with bright red hair. "I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chen, weapons officer. This thing can punch through most armor like it's paper." Zexithul was beginning to understand why the humans had been the last species invited to join the Council's war effort. "And your defensive systems?" Santos pointed to various sections of the ship. "We've got shield generators here, here, and here. They're not fancy, but they work. Main thing is, they're all different types. Some are electromagnetic, some are particle barriers, and one's actually just a really strong gravity field. Why would you use 3 different systems? Asked Consul Varix. Because Tommy found them in 3 different junkyards, Santos said matter-of-factly. But it turns out that having mismatched systems makes us harder to predict. Enemy ships expect one type of shield, and when their weapons don't work right, it gives us time to shoot back. The diplomatic corps was beginning to look physically ill. Engineer Rodriguez stepped forward. Want to hear about our computer system? It's really something special. Please, no, muttered someone in the back row. Rodriguez ignored them. We've got 7 different operating systems running the ship. Some of them are so old they still use punch cards. The navigation computer is actually connected to the coffee machine, because that was the only way we could get enough processing power. Your navigation depends on a beverage dispenser? Zexthul's voice had risen to a pitch that made several other aliens wince. Works fine, Rodriguez said proudly. Just have to remember to make coffee before we jump to hyperspace, or the coordinates. Get all wonky, Captain Santos clapped her hands together. Any other questions about the buckshot? We're really excited to help out with this war. The aliens sat in stunned silence. Finally, General Thrax found his voice. Captain Santos, with all due respect to your creativity, perhaps your vessel would be better suited to supply runs, rather than combat operations. Santos looked genuinely puzzled. Why? We're here to fight. Your ship appears to be held together with hope and scrap metal, Zexthul said as diplomatically as possible. Well, yeah, Santos agreed. That's how we build everything. If it works, it works. Before the conversation could continue, alarm klaxons began blaring throughout the mothership. Red lights flashed, and automated voices announced in a dozen languages. Alert. Enemy contacts detected. All vessels prepare for combat. The meeting hall's viewing screen switched to a tactical display. At the edge of the star system, dark shapes were emerging from hyperspace. The Void Swarm had found them. The alien warships around the mothership immediately began moving into formation. Their sleek hulls gleamed as weapon systems powered up. Quantum torpedoes armed themselves, plasma arrays charged to full power, and reality distortion fields activated around the most advanced vessels. Human vessel buckshot, came a transmission from the Council Fleet Commander. Maintain position behind the battle line. Observe and learn. Captain Santos looked at her crew. Well, that's insulting. Want me to warm up the gun, Captain? Asked Lieutenant Chen. Let's see how this plays out first, Santos decided. But keep an eye on that engine, Tommy. If it's going to explode today, I'd rather it be at something other than us. The human crew watched as the Council's advanced fleet moved to intercept the Void Swarm. Around them, alien diplomats evacuated the meeting hall, leaving only the humans behind. Think we'll get to do anything? Rodriguez asked. Santos smiled. Oh, I'm pretty sure we'll find a way to help out. The buckshot drifted behind the main fleet, looking like the galactic equivalent of a pickup truck following a parade of sports cars. But on the bridge, 3 humans watched the approaching battle with the confidence of people who had learned to make impossible things work. The war was about to begin, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy what they could do. The Council fleet moved like a perfect machine. 67 warships arranged themselves in a complex formation that had been tested in thousands of battles. Each vessel knew exactly where to be and when to fire. Their computers calculated firing, solutions with mathematical precision. Admiral Kethvar commanded the operation from his flagship, the Eternal Harmony. The massive dreadnought bristled with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. Its quantum torpedo tubes could phase shift projectiles through multiple dimensions before impact. Its plasma arrays could melt asteroids from 1,000 kilometers away. Enemy fleet composition analysis complete, reported his tactical officer. 17 Void Swarm bioships, class 4 through 7. Recommend opening engagement at maximum. Range with quantum torpedoes. Proceed, Admiral Kethvar ordered. His species had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. This would be a routine engagement. The quantum torpedoes streaked across space, leaving trails of bent reality behind them. They should have torn through the void swarm ships like tissue paper. Instead, the enemy vessels absorbed the impacts without visible damage. "Sir," the tactical officer's voice carried a note of confusion. "The enemy ships appear to have adapted, quantum-resistant hulls." Kethvar's tentacles tightened around his command chair. The void swarm was known for its ability to adapt, but this was faster than usual. "Switch to plasma arrays, full power." Beams of superheated matter lanced out from the council ships. The space between the fleets lit up like a miniature star. But when the light faded, the void swarm vessels were still advancing. "Plasma absorption fields detected," the tactical officer reported. "They're converting our energy attacks into power for their own systems." On the bridge of the UES Buckshot, Captain Santos watched the battle with growing interest. The Council's advanced weapons were having no effect at all. "That's not good," Lieutenant Chen observed. "Their fancy guns aren't working." "The swarm adapts to whatever you throw at them," Santos said. "Intelligence briefings mentioned that. Guess the aliens forgot." Engineer Rodriguez was monitoring the enemy ships on his jury-rigged scanner system. "Captain, I'm reading some weird energy signatures from those bioships. Looks like they're changing their hull composition in real time." "Living ships," Santos mused. "They evolved during battle. Smart." The Council fleet was beginning to take casualties. Void swarm vessels spit streams of acid that ate through quantum shields like they weren't there. Biotorpedoes that looked like giant insects crawled along ship hulls, finding weak points and exploding. Admiral Kethvar's perfect formation was falling apart. His ships scattered as they tried to avoid weapons they couldn't defend against. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "the humans are moving." On the tactical display, the tiny dot representing the UES Buckshot was accelerating toward the battle. "Recall them immediately," Kethvar ordered. "That primitive vessel will be destroyed in seconds." The communication went out, but Captain Santos ignored it. She was studying the enemy ships and didn't like what she saw. 3 council vessels had already been destroyed and more were taking heavy damage. "Tommy, how's our gun looking?" she asked. "Ready to fire, Captain. Though I should mention the targeting computer is acting up again. It keeps trying to order coffee." "That's fine. We'll aim manually." Santos turned to her weapons officer. "Sarah, you see that big, ugly ship in the middle?" Lieutenant Chen nodded. "The one that looks like a squid made of metal. That's their command ship. Put a hole in it." Chen's fingers danced across her control panel. The targeting system was indeed trying to place an order for 3 espressos and a sandwich, but she worked around it. "Target locked. Firing." The railgun spoke with a sound like thunder. A solid tungsten slug the size of a telephone pole shot out at 15% of light speed. It crossed the distance to the Void Swarm fleet in 2.3 seconds. The command ship's adaptive armor was designed to counter energy weapons and exotic matter. It had no defense against a simple chunk of metal traveling at relativistic speeds. The slug punched through the bioship's hull like it was made of paper. The ship convulsed, its organic systems trying to adapt to damage they couldn't understand. Green fluid sprayed from the exit wound. "Direct hit?" Chen reported with satisfaction. "Their command ship is leaking." Suddenly, every Void Swarm vessel turned toward the Buckshot. "Uh-oh," Rodriguez said. "I think we made them mad." "Good," Santos replied. "Now they're not shooting at the council ships. Sarah, keep firing. Tommy, give me everything you've got." The Buckshot charged into the enemy formation like a bull in a china shop. Void Swarm bioships tried to intercept it, but the human ship was moving too erratically. Santos wasn't following any tactical manual. She was flying by instinct, changing course whenever it felt right. Acid streams missed by meters. Bio-torpedoes couldn't lock onto a target that refused to fly in a straight line. The swarm's predictive algorithms couldn't calculate firing solutions for a ship that seemed to be making random decisions. Meanwhile, the Buckshot's railgun kept firing. Each shot was a solid hit because the swarm ships couldn't believe anyone was still using kinetic weapons. Their defenses were evolved to stop the Council's advanced technology, not simple metal slugs. "Their adaptive systems can't handle us," Chen laughed as she put another round through a bioship's brain case. We're too primitive for them to understand. But the swarm was learning. One of their ships suddenly sprouted thick armor plates where the buckshot's next shot would hit. The tungsten slug bounced off harmlessly. They're adapting to us too, Santos observed. Time to try something else. She spun the ship around and headed straight for the largest void swarm vessel. Its surface writhed with defensive weapons, all tracking the approaching human ship. Captain, Rodriguez said nervously, please tell me you're not planning to ram them. Of course not, Santos said. That would be crazy. She paused. I'm planning to ram them and then back away at the last second. The buckshot dove toward the bioship at full speed. Every weapon on the swarm vessel opened fire. Acid streams, bio-torpedoes, and energy beams filled the space around the human ship. Santos flew through the barrage like she was dancing. The buckshot's mismatched shields flickered and sparked as they absorbed different types of damage. One shield generator overloaded, but the other two kept working. At the last possible second, Santos pulled up. The buckshot skimmed along the bioship's hull so close that Rodriguez could have reached out and touched it. Now! Santos shouted. Chen had been waiting for this moment. She fired the railgun at point-blank range, directly into the bioship's sensory cluster. The tungsten slug tore through the creature's brain, killing it instantly. The massive ship went limp and began drifting. Around them, the tide of battle was turning. The council ships had regrouped and were targeting the swarm, vessels that the buckshot had damaged. Their weapons were finally having an effect on enemies that were distracted and hurt. Admiral Kethvar watched in amazement as the primitive human ship continued its assault. The buckshot was covered in scorch marks and acid burns, but it kept fighting. Its crew seemed to treat the battle like an interesting puzzle rather than a life-or-death struggle. Sir, his tactical officer reported, the void swarm is retreating. The surviving bioships were pulling back, their adaptive systems overloaded by trying to counter two completely different types of warfare at once. They needed time to process what they had learned. As the enemy withdrew, the council fleet began damage assessment. 7 ships had been destroyed and many others were heavily damaged. But they had won, thanks to the intervention of humanity's strangest vessel. Open a channel to the human ship, Admiral Kethvar ordered. Captain Santos appeared, on his screen, looking cheerful despite the scorch marks on her uniform. Behind her, smoke was drifting across the buckshot's bridge. Nice work out there, Admiral, she said. Your ships did great once we softened them up. Captain Santos, Kethvar said slowly, your vessel appears to be on fire. Santos glanced over her shoulder. Oh, that's just the coffee machine. It always does that after we fire the main gun. Tommy's got it handled. Indeed, Engineer Rodriguez could be seen in the background spraying foam at a control panel that was definitely not supposed to be smoking. Captain, the Admiral continued, I owe you an apology and an explanation. How did you know to use kinetic weapons? Santos shrugged. Sometimes the old ways work best. Those bioships were so busy adapting to your fancy technology, they forgot that getting hit by a big chunk of metal hurts no matter what. Your ship took considerable damage, Kethvar observed. Nothing we can't fix, Santos said confidently. Tommy's already making a shopping list. We'll hit the next supply depot and patch her up good as new. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Kethvar staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew worked in silence, processing what they had witnessed. The humans had just won, a battle using technology that was obsolete before some species had developed writing. Their ship looked like it had been assembled by blind mechanics having a bad day. And somehow they had made it work. In the distance, the UES Buckshot was already heading toward the supply depot, trailing smoke and sparks but flying steady. On its hull, new scorch marks joined the collection of patches and repairs. News of the Buckshot's victory spread across the galaxy faster than hyperspace communications. Within 3 days, every major news network was running stories about the human ship that had saved a council fleet using primitive weapons and impossible flying. The Galactic Military Academy requested detailed battle recordings for study. The Strategic Planning Institute demanded technical specifications. The University of Centauri wanted to interview the crew for their xenopsychology department. Captain Santos ignored all of them. She was too busy supervising repairs at Supply. Depot 7, a massive space station that served the Outer Rim territories. "Hand me that plasma welder," Engineer Rodriguez called out from inside the Buckshot's engine compartment. "This fusion coupling is held together with prayer and good intentions." "Same as always," Santos replied, passing him the tool. "How's it looking?" "Well, the good news is we only need to replace half the ship," Rodriguez said cheerfully. Bad news is we can't afford half the parts we need." Lieutenant Chen looked up from her weapon maintenance. "What about that pile of scrap the depot manager offered us?" Santos walked over to examine the materials they'd been given. The depot's manager, a friendly insectoid named Click 7, had offered them a selection of salvaged components from various ships. Most of it looked like junk, but Santos had learned to see potential in unlikely places. "This plate armor came off a Thraxian battle cruiser," she mused, running her hand along a section of scarred metal. "It's got some character to it." "Character?" Chen asked. "Blast marks, acid burns, and what looks like claw marks from some really big predator," Santos explained. "But it's still solid. We can use this to patch the holes in our hull." Rodriguez emerged from the engine compartment covered in grease and glowing coolant fluid. "Found the problem with the fusion reactor. Remember how I said it only explodes every other Tuesday?" "Yeah?" "Turns out that was just a coincidence. It actually explodes whenever it gets excited." Santos considered this information. "Define excited." "Loud. Noises, sudden accelerations, people singing in the engine room," Rodriguez listed. "Oh, and apparently it really doesn't like jazz music." "Good to know. We'll stick to classical during combat." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a news crew from Galactic Broadcasting Network. The reporter was a tall, silver-skinned humanoid with far too many teeth. "Captain Santos," the reporter called out. "Zan Kralex, GBN News. Could we have a few words about your miraculous victory?" Santos sighed. "I told your producer, we're busy fixing our ship." "But the galaxy wants to know," Kralex insisted. "How did a primitive vessel like yours defeat the Void Swarm when the Council's most advanced ships couldn't?" "We shot them with our gun until they stopped moving," Santos said simply. Not much of a story there. Kralex's cameraman was already recording, focusing on the Buckshot's patched hull and jury rig systems. "But military experts are calling it impossible. Your ship violates every principle of modern naval warfare." "Good," Chen interjected. "Following the rules is how you get predictable. Predictable gets you dead." Rodriguez wiped his hands on an oily rag. "Want to see something really impressive?" He led the news crew over to the ship's computer core. "This is our main navigation system." The reporter stared at a collection of mismatched components that looked like they'd been assembled by someone who'd never seen a computer before. Multiple keyboards were connected to screens showing different operating systems. Wires ran everywhere, some of them held in place with actual tape. "This is your navigation computer?" Kralex asked weakly. "Part of it," Rodriguez said proudly. "The rest is distributed throughout the ship. Some calculations happen in the coffee machine, some in the backup life support. And the quantum compass is actually inside the ship's microwave." "Why would you design it that way?" Rodriguez looked puzzled. "Design? Oh, we didn't design anything, we just kept adding components until it worked." The reporter's camera operator was getting shots of everything, clearly fascinated by the chaotic arrangement. "How do you operate such a system?" "Carefully," Santos said. "And with a lot of coffee. The navigation system gets cranky if we don't feed the coffee machine regularly." Kralex was taking notes frantically. "Military analysts say your success was due to the Void Swarm's inability to adapt to primitive technology." "That's part of it," Santos agreed. "But the real secret is that we don't know what we're going to do next, so the enemy can't predict us either." "You mean you don't plan your tactics?" "Oh, we plan," Chen said. "We just don't plan very well. Leave room for improvisation." To demonstrate, Rodriguez started the Buckshot's engines for a systems check. The ship immediately began vibrating in a way that made everyone's teeth rattle. One of the engine exhausts started sparking and something that sounded like a washing machine began clanging somewhere in the hull. Is that normal? Krelex asked nervously. Define normal, Santos replied, checking a readout that showed 17 different warning lights. The engines are running, we're not losing atmosphere, and the reactor hasn't exploded in the last 5 minutes. That's what we call a good day. Their interview was interrupted by an urgent communication from Council. Command. Admiral Kethavar appeared on the ship's main screen, his expression grave. Captain Santos, we have a situation. Long-range scouts report a massive void swarm fleet massing near the Kepler sector. They're adapting their ships to counter kinetic weapons. Santos frowned. How massive? Over 200 bioships. Our intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major assault on the core worlds. What do you need from us? The Council is assembling every available vessel for the defense of Kethmoran Prime. Your unique capabilities may be our only advantage. After the transmission ended, the news crew waited eagerly for Santos's response. So, Krelex prompted, how does it feel to be humanity's best hope against an overwhelming enemy force? Santos looked at her crew. Rodriguez was elbow deep in the engine again, trying to stop the sparking. Chen was loading tungsten slugs into the railgun, whistling an old Earth song. Their ship was held together with salvaged parts and determination. Honestly, Santos said, just another Tuesday. The repairs took 2 more days. During that time, other human ships began arriving at the depot. Each one looked worse than the last. The UES Paperclip appeared to be constructed entirely from office supplies and wishful thinking. Its captain, a cheerful woman named Lisa Park, explained that the ship's armor was made from compressed paperwork and its main gun-fired staples at hypersonic speeds. The UES Murphy's Law was deliberately built to fail in creative ways. Its captain, Jim Morrison, had incorporated breakaway sections that would detach during combat, creating unpredictable debris fields that confused enemy targeting systems. The UES duct tape looked exactly like its name suggested. Captain Elena Rodriguez, no relation to Tommy, had built her entire ship around the philosophy that anything could be fixed with enough adhesive and engineering stubbornness. This is our fleet? Krelex asked, watching the human ships dock at various repair bays. Part of it, Santos said. Earth's been building ships like this for 50 years. We've got maybe 300 vessels scattered across the outer rim. 300 ships that look like they were assembled in a scrapyard? The best scrapyard, Santos corrected. We've had a lot of practice making things work with limited resources. As the human fleet prepared for departure, Santos held a brief meeting with the other captains. They gathered in the Buckshot's mess hall, which doubled as a conference room when they moved the pool table. Intel says the swarm has adapted, Santos began. They're expecting kinetic weapons now. So we adapt too, Captain Park said. Paperclips. Got some new tricks. I've been working on a net launcher that fires steel cable at really high speeds. Murphy's Law has proximity mines that look like spare parts, Captain Morrison added. They won't know they're weapons until they explode. What about coordination? Captain Rodriguez asked. Council fleets use complex battle plans. Santos smiled. We'll do what we always do. Make it up as we go along. The other captains nodded. This was how humans had always fought, with improvisation, stubbornness, and an unwillingness to admit defeat even when it was obvious. One more thing, Santos said. Tommy's been analyzing the swarm bioships. They adapt by evolving their hull composition and defensive systems, but evolution takes time. How much time? Park asked. About 3 minutes to counter a new threat. But here's the thing. They can only adapt to threats they recognize. If we keep changing our tactics faster than they can evolve, we can stay ahead of them. Chaos doctrine, Morrison said approvingly. Fight so unpredictably that even we don't know what we're doing. Exactly. The swarm thinks they understand human tactics because they've seen us fight once. Let's show them how wrong they are. As the human fleet prepared for departure, Krelex filed his final report. The human fleet defies every convention of military doctrine. Their ships are barely functional, their crews appear to be making decisions at random, and their tactics seem designed by people who have never read a strategy manual. And yet there is something unsettling about their confidence. These humans act as though losing is simply not an option, as if their ramshackle ships and improvised weapons are somehow superior to the galaxy's most advanced technology. The fortress world of Kethmoran Prime hung in space like a jewel surrounded by steel. Massive orbital defense platforms formed rings around the planet, their weapons pointed outward at the approaching darkness. The largest space docks in the galaxy were here, where the Council's most powerful warships had been built over centuries of peace. Now those same docks were filled with the greatest fleet ever assembled. Over 400 vessels from dozens of worlds formed a defensive wall between Kethmoran and the approaching Void Swarm. The newest dreadnoughts bristled with reality-warping weapons that could crack moons. Cruisers armed with antimatter torpedoes moved in perfect formation. The collective firepower could have sterilized entire star systems. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical displays with growing concern. Long-range sensors showed the Void Swarm fleet approaching like a dark tide. Over 200 bioships, each one larger and more heavily armed than before. "Analysis complete, sir," his tactical officer reported. "The enemy vessels show significant adaptations, thicker armor, redundant systems, and what appears to be kinetic-resistant plating. They learned from our last encounter," Kethvar mused. "Prepare all ships for engagement, maximum range, full firepower." But even as he gave the orders, the Admiral felt a nagging doubt. The Void Swarm had never shown this level of preparation before. They were planning something. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "the human fleet is requesting permission to join the battle line." Kethvar activated his view screen to see the approaching human ships. There were more of them now, 37 vessels that looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts and held together with determination. At their head flew the UES Buckshot, still bearing scorch marks from its last battle. "Captain Santos," Kethvar greeted her. "Your fleet is larger than expected." Santos grinned from her bridge. Behind her, smoke was drifting from what appeared to be a malfunctioning coffee machine. "Word got around that there was going to be a good fight, you know how it is. I must advise you that the enemy has adapted to counter-kinetic weapons. Your previous tactics may not be effective." "That's okay," Santos said cheerfully. "We've got new tricks too." Before Kethvar could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout the fleet. The Void Swarm had arrived. The bioships emerged from hyperspace in a formation that hurt to look at. They moved like a living organism, flowing and shifting in patterns that seemed to follow no military logic. But there was an intelligence behind their movement, a predatory cunning that made veteran officers nervous. "All ships open fire," Kethvar commanded. The Council fleet unleashed everything it had. Quantum torpedoes that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Plasma beams that could melt through neutronium. Gravity bombs that created temporary black holes. The space between the fleets lit up like the birth of a star. For a moment it seemed like the overwhelming firepower might actually work. Several bioships staggered under the assault, their organic hulls smoking and sparking. Then they began to adapt. The Void Swarm vessels shifted and changed before the Council's eyes. Their hulls flowed like liquid, rearranging themselves to better deflect energy weapons. New armor plates sprouted from their surfaces. Defensive fields flickered to life around the entire fleet. "Impossible," breathed the tactical officer. "They're adapting in real time. Faster than before." The return volley from the swarm was devastating. Biotorpedoes that moved like living creatures swarmed through the Council formations. Acid streams ate through quantum shields. Creatures that looked like giant insects landed on ship hulls and began boring through the armor with molecular disruptors. 3 Council ships died in the first exchange. Then 5 more. The perfect formations began to break apart as captains maneuvered desperately to avoid weapons they couldn't counter. "Sir," his communications officer said urgently, "the humans are moving." On the tactical display, the human fleet was accelerating toward the enemy. But instead of maintaining formation, they were spreading out randomly. Some ships were diving toward the planet's gravity well. Others were climbing toward the system's outer edge. A few seemed to be flying in circles. "What are they doing?" Kethvar demanded. Captain Santos's voice came over the comm channel, calm and confident. Improvising all human ships weapons-free. Show them what we brought. The UES paperclip was the first to fire. Instead of projectiles, it launched what appeared to be a massive net made of steel cable. The net expanded as it flew, growing to cover several kilometers. When it hit a void swarm bioship, the cables wrapped around the creature's hull and began contracting, cutting deep grooves in the adaptive armor. The bioship tried to evolve countermeasures. But how do you adapt to being strangled? The UES Murphy's Law opened its cargo bays and released clouds of what looked like space debris. The junk spread out in seemingly random patterns until void swarm ships began flying through it. Then the debris revealed itself to be proximity mines disguised as broken machinery. Explosions rippled through the enemy formation. The UES ducked. Tape fired something that Admiral Kethavar's sensors couldn't identify. It looked like a missile, but it was moving in a spiral pattern and leaving a trail of what appeared to be adhesive behind it. When it impacted a bioship, the creature found itself stuck to 3 other vessels and unable to maneuver. Brilliant, Kethavar whispered. They're using weapons the swarm has never encountered. The bioships can't adapt to threats they don't understand. But the buckshot was saving the best for last. Captain Santos had been studying the enemy formation, looking for patterns. The void swarm ships moved like a living organism because they were a living organism, a collective intelligence that coordinated through bioelectric signals. Tommy, Santos called to her engineer. Remember that signal amplifier you built from old radio parts? The one that picks up music from 3 centuries ago? Rodriguez replied. What about it? Can you reverse it? Make it broadcast instead of receive? Sure, but what would you want to broadcast? Santos smiled. Jazz music, really loud jazz music. Rodriguez looked confused, then his eyes lit up with understanding. Oh, that's evil. I love it. The Buckshot's improvised signal amplifier began broadcasting the collected works of Earth's greatest jazz musicians directly into the bioelectric communications network of the Void Swarm. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and Duke Ellington flooded the collective consciousness with chaotic harmonies and improvised rhythms. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The swarm ships began moving erratically, their perfect coordination shattered by musical interference they couldn't filter out. Some vessels collided with others. A few began firing randomly at empty space. Now! Santos shouted. Hit them while they're confused. The human fleet attacked with everything they had. Railguns fired tungsten slugs at ships that were too distracted to dodge. Net launchers wrapped up bioships that couldn't coordinate their defenses. Proximity mines exploded among enemies who were too busy trying to filter out bebop saxophone to notice the danger. But the Void Swarm was learning. Even through the musical chaos, some ships were beginning to adapt. They developed bioelectric filters, evolved redundant communication systems, and started coordinating in smaller groups that could resist the interference. They're adapting to the jazz, Rodriguez reported with obvious disappointment. Then we switched to something else, Santos decided. What about polka? Already loaded, Rodriguez grinned. And I've got classical, country, and death metal standing by. As the human fleet continued its chaotic assault, the council ships regrouped and joined the attack. Their advanced weapons were finally finding targets among enemies too confused to maintain proper defenses. The tide of battle was turning, but Admiral Kethvar could see that the Void Swarm still had superior numbers. For every bioship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The enemy was learning to counter human tactics, just as they had learned to counter Council technology. Sir, his tactical officer reported, the swarm is concentrating their remaining forces for a final assault. They're targeting the orbital defense platforms. Kethvar watched in horror as the bioships reformed into a spear formation aimed at Kethmaran's defenses. If they broke through, billions of civilians would die. All ships, intercept course, he ordered. Protect the planet, at all costs. But even as the Council fleet moved to block the attack, everyone could see they wouldn't make it in time. The Void Swarm ships were too fast, too determined. The bioships began accelerating toward the planet's orbital ring. That's when Captain Santos did something that violated every rule of space combat. She turned the buckshot around and flew directly away from the battle. "Captain," Admiral Kethvar's voice was sharp with betrayal. "Where are you going?" "To save the day," Santos replied calmly. "Tommy, remember how I said the reactor only explodes every other Tuesday?" "Yeah? What day is it today?" Rodriguez checked his calendar. "Tuesday." "Perfect. Sarah, I need you to fire everything we've got at that big ugly bioship in the center of their formation. The one that looks like a squid made of nightmares." "Captain," Chen said slowly, "at this range, even our railgun won't have enough power to penetrate their armor." "I'm not planning to penetrate anything," Santos said. "I'm planning to miss." 6 months after the Battle of Kethmoran, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy peace. The Void Swarm had withdrawn to the dark spaces between stars, analyzing their defeats and planning new strategies. Intelligence reports suggested they were building something massive in the void beyond the galactic rim. The Council used this time to rebuild their fleets and study human warfare. Military academies across the galaxy now offered courses in adaptive chaos theory and applied impossibility. The textbooks were mostly blank since human tactics seemed to change every time someone tried to write them down. Captain Maria Santos stood in the observation deck of the brand-new UES Buckshot II, watching the construction crews put finishing touches on humanity's strangest warship. The original Buckshot had finally exploded beyond repair 3 weeks ago, taking half a space dock with it. But the crew had simply collected the pieces and started building something even more improbable. "She's beautiful," Engineer Rodriguez said, admiring their handiwork. The new ship looked like someone had taken the original Buckshot and improved it using techniques learned from a fever dream. The hull was covered in patches of different materials, some salvaged from defeated Void Swarm ships. The engines appeared to be mounted sideways, and one of them was definitely upside down. "Tommy," Santos said carefully, "why is there a kitchen attached to the main gun?" "Efficiency," Rodriguez explained. "The railgun generates a lot of heat when it fires, so I figured we might as well use that energy to cook food. Plus, the coffee machine helps regulate the targeting system." Lieutenant Chen looked up from her weapons console. "The good news is, our firepower has doubled. The bad news is, I'm not entirely sure what half these weapons do." She pointed to a collection of mysterious devices mounted along the ship's hull. One appeared to be a giant slingshot. Another looked like it might launch kitchen appliances at high velocity. A third was definitely some kind of net launcher, but it was painted bright pink for reasons no one could remember. "Want me to test them?" Chen asked hopefully. "Better wait until we're away from the space dock," Santos decided. "Remember what happened last time we tested weapons in port?" Rodriguez nodded sadly. "Poor Supply Depot 9. At least the fire only lasted 3 days. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Admiral Kethvar. The alien commander appeared on their main screen, his usually calm expression showing signs of stress. "Captain Santos, we have a situation. Long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures from the galactic rim. The Void Swarm is returning." "How massive?" Santos asked. "The largest fleet we've ever recorded. Over 500 bioships, including vessels of unprecedented size. Some are reading as large as small moons." Santos whistled appreciatively. "They've been busy. What's the plan?" "The Council is mobilizing every available ship for a final confrontation. But our analysts believe the Swarm has found a way to counter all known weapon systems, including your creative approaches." "Where's the meeting point?" "The Nexus sector. It's a region of space where several hyperspace routes converge. If we can't stop them there, they'll have access to every populated system in the galaxy." Santos looked at her crew. Rodriguez was already running calculations on his jury-rigged computer system. Chen was checking weapon inventories. Both of them had the look of people who'd just been told they had an interesting problem to solve. "We'll be there," Santos promised. "How long do we have?" "The Swarm will reach the Nexus in 72 hours. The fate of the galaxy may depend on this battle." After the transmission ended, Santos called for a meeting in the ship's mess hall. The space was cramped and doubled as a storage area for spare parts, but it was the only room large enough for the entire crew. So, she began, anyone have ideas for fighting moon-sized bioships that have adapted to everything we've tried before? Chief Petty Officer Williams, the ship's cook and unofficial morale officer, raised his hand. What if we tried cooking them? Come again? Well, they're organic, right? Maybe if we heated them up enough, they'd get tender and fall apart. Rodriguez perked up. That's not completely crazy. The new reactor runs hot enough to boil water at a distance of 50 meters. If we could somehow channel that heat into a weapon, Chen finished. A heat ray made from kitchen equipment. Santos grinned. I love it. What else? Communications. Officer Park spoke up. What about music? The jazz attack worked before, maybe we could try something different. Like what? Death metal, Park said seriously. Really loud, really angry death metal. The kind that makes your ears bleed. Can the communication array handle that kind of output? Rodriguez was already sketching diagrams on a napkin. I could boost the signal by running it through the ship's heating system. The pipes would act like amplifiers. Brilliant. Next idea? Navigator Singh cleared his throat. What if we don't fight them at all? The room fell silent. Santos raised an eyebrow. Explain. The Void Swarm adapts to whatever attacks them, right? But what if we didn't attack? What if we just annoyed them to death? Annoyed them how? Singh smiled. Advertising. Really obnoxious advertising. The kind that gets stuck in your head and won't leave. Santos stared at him. You want to defeat an invasion fleet with jingle songs? Think about it, Singh said eagerly. They're a collective consciousness. If we can get an annoying tune stuck in their shared mind, they'll be too distracted to fight effectively. Rodriguez was nodding enthusiastically. I could modify the communication array to broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously. Really drive the message home. What kind of advertising? Chen asked. Insurance, Singh said without hesitation. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on Starship insurance. The room erupted in groans and protests. That's evil, Williams said with admiration. That's psychological warfare, Santos corrected. I love it. Over the next 48 hours, the Buckshot 2 transformed into something that defied both military doctrine and common sense. The heat ray system turned the ship's galley into a weapon capable of flash-frying anything within a 5-kilometer radius. The death metal amplification system could probably be heard from 3 star systems away. And the advertising broadcast array was loaded with the most annoying commercial jingles in human history. As they approached the Nexus sector, Santos received updates from the assembled Council fleet. Over 600 ships from 40 different worlds had gathered for the final battle. Dreadnoughts that could crack planets floated alongside cruisers armed with weapons that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. And in the middle of it, all 37 human ships that looked like they'd been built by people who'd never seen a proper spaceship. Captain, Chen reported, I'm reading massive hyperspace distortions. The swarm is arriving. The first bioships emerged from hyperspace like nightmares made real. They were enormous, some larger than asteroids, their organic hulls pulsing with alien life. Behind them came hundreds of smaller vessels, all moving with the terrifying coordination of a hive mind. But it was the flagship that made everyone stop and stare. The massive creature was the size of a small moon, its surface covered in weapons that hurt to look at. It pulsed with dark energy that seemed to eat light itself. Preliminary scan complete, the Council's science officer reported over the fleet channel. The enemy flagship is... I don't have words for this. It's not just a ship, it's an entire ecosystem. The smaller bioships are actually part of its body. Admiral Kethvar's voice was grim. All ships prepare for battle. This is our last stand, the E. Council fleet opened fire with everything they had. Quantum torpedoes, plasma arrays, gravity bombs, and weapons that existed only in theoretical physics. The space between the fleets lit up with enough energy to power a solar system. The Void Swarm absorbed it all. Their bioships had evolved perfect defenses against every weapon in the Council's arsenal. Energy attacks were converted to power. Kinetic weapons were deflected by bioelectric fields. Even exotic matter weapons were neutralized by hull adaptations. The return fire was devastating. Bioacid ate through quantum shields. Living torpedoes that looked like giant insects swarmed through the formations. The massive flagship opened what might have been a mouth and spat out a stream of something that turned 3 dreadnoughts into space dust. All ships, Santos called over the human fleet channel. Time to get creative. Williams, fire up the heat ray. Park, start broadcasting death metal. Singh, launch the advertising campaign. The buckshot Detoon opened fire with its collection of impossible weapons. The heat ray turned 2 bioships into something resembling cosmic soup. The death metal broadcast caused several swarm vessels to start flying in circles, their coordination disrupted by aggressive guitar solos. And the advertising jingles began their insidious work on the collective consciousness. Other human ships joined the assault with their own creative approaches. The UES Paperclip launched a barrage of office supplies at relativistic speeds. The UES Murphy's Law released clouds of deliberately faulty equipment that exploded at random intervals. The UES Duct Tape fired adhesive missiles that stuck enemy ships together in ungainly clusters. For a moment it seemed like the chaotic human tactics might work again. The Void Swarm was clearly struggling to adapt to attacks that made no tactical sense.